Welcome to the this book launch. I can't see you, but I hope you can see me. Um, Great to have you here on this Friday in February. Just first of all, I'd like to say thank you to Bira for hosting the event. This is taking place as part of the special interest group, Social Theory and Education, which is co-convened by myself and my co-conspirator, Christina Costa, who's also an editor of the book. So we're kind of killing two birds at one stone here. So it's great to have the opportunity to launch the book via the Bira organization, an organization which we've been part of for many, many years, has been very supportive. Just on that note, in terms of the SIG, don't forget that the abstracts, the deadline for abstracts for Bira and for our special interest group is, I think, the 28th of February. So it's a bit later this year. So that gives you an opportunity to get your abstract in. So it'd be great to see you in what will be, as far as I know, an online event in September. So again, thank you very much. Can we move to the first slide, please? So this is the beginning of the official launch of the book. The book came out, I think, the end of last year, the beginning of January. I think it's officially 2021. And the name of the book is Social Theory and the Politics of Higher Education, Critical Perspectives on Institutional Research. It's surprising nobody came up with that title before. I was very pleased to see nobody had. But of course, there are variations on a theme out there, but the book itself, as an edited collection, gives us the opportunity to collate and bring together a wide set of ideas around topics to do with social theory and the politics of higher education. For those of us who are in higher education, we live the politics of higher education. And of course, because we live the politics of higher education, we live within the institutions that represent higher education. And the university is the key institution of that sector. And so it's myself, Mark Murphy, Kieran Burke, who will be part of this presentation, Christina Costa. Do you want to say this hi there, Christina?
Hi.
Yeah. And Rilla Rapper. So you can see that Christina waved at you. Now, if you wave at us, you'll be waving into the abyss because we can't see you. So you can save your waves for later. So as part of the presentation, we're going to run through the book's content, the aims and so on. And but there will be, as I said before, there will be these opportunities for interaction after each of the sessions. And then at the end of the presentation, we can open up for questions and answers as well. So it'd be great to hear what people have to say. And also, I know that some of the people who are attending have contributed to the book. So I'd like to say, welcome to them, and also a big thank you to their contribution, because without it, it wouldn't have happened, clearly. And the content is one thing, of course, but look at the style, people. Look at the cover of that book. I mean, let's face it. I mean, that Bloomsbury have done a good job. It has to be said. Other publishers should really take note, because some of their covers are atrocious. And they just keep coming up with the same ones over and over again. So we're really pleased. It looks good on the bookshelf. Not that we're all about style, but style does matter. Can I go to the next slide, please? So this book belongs to a book series called Social Theory and Methodology in Education Research, which is edited by myself, which was launched, I think, 3 years ago. And in the series, there's been, I think, 10 books published, ready to be published on a variety of topics. You'll see some there from the slide. the topics include teacher education, education governance, aspirations, as well as particular thinkers such as Norbert Elias and Pierre Bourdieu. And so me being series editor, it would be a bit strange if I didn't publish in my own series. So I'm delighted to have the opportunity to do that. And just so people know, I'm happy to discuss potential topics with people if they want to get in touch with me via email. I'd be happy to have a chat. But the series itself the book itself reflects the aims of the series. So if we can go to the next slide, please. So the core aim of the book is to deliver a critical examination of higher education through the intellectual prism of social theory. Now, of course, not that that's necessarily new. Social theory has offered an alternative, a counter argument to prevailing tendencies of control and compliance in the sector. It's offered an alternative critique that has always been present in discourses of academic life. So social theory has been invaluable as a source of ideas, as a source of alternative, radical concepts that can be used to explore what is supposed to be one of the bastions of democratic life. But so there's the ideas aspect is important, but you probably guessed from the title of the book and from the series, there's also another aspect to it, which is a methodological standpoint. The book offers a set of case studies that offer crucial examples of intellectual rigor and research quality in higher education research. So part of the aim for us as a team, for the contributors, is to strengthen the connection between theory and practice, which of course is part of the key rationale of university academic life. And as I said in the foreword, I wrote the foreword to the book, as I do to all the books in the series. This book represents a viable alternative to positivist, supposedly value-free approaches to education research. Social theory is a political enterprise. There's absolutely no doubt about that. So, but positivism still marches on regardless, even with the existence of many theory-laden, theory-driven forms of education research. But by its very nature, it offers that alternative and counterpoint, and we shouldn't forget that. A bit like Polanyi's counter movement, the social theory offers it. Although, of course, it's because it's so disparate, so diverse, and sometimes conflicted, we forget that aspect, I think. But having said that, it's still very visible in the sector, as you would expect. But just to give a little bit of background, we put a call out for abstracts. I think it was 2019, maybe earlier, and received quite a healthy response from people. And so I'd just like to say thanks to everybody who did put an abstract in. We chose the chapters that most fitted the remit and organization of the book itself. So the ones who weren't chosen, it wasn't because they lacked in qualities, because we could only do so much, and we wanted to cover, as you will gather from my introduction, a certain number of themes. But the response itself is an indication of the quality of work taking place in this area, and also the breadth of topics under investigation. It also gave us an opportunity to engage with early career researchers. It's an interesting point to reflect on for us as a team, that by doing an open call, as the first time I've ever done an open call, doing an open call allows you to reach people who haven't published already. Now, when you reach people who publish already, in a way, it's kind of, what would you say, easier. You know their work, they've gone through the review process, etc. But there's a political element to this, to include early career researchers and to widen the pool of those who are publishing in this field. So I think that's a minor point, but something to remember, I think, for us and to reflect on. So, and I say the book offers a set of case studies, and we hope that this offers crucial examples, and it does, of intellectual rigor and research quality. Quality and rigor, two of the most contested concepts in the field. and there's no reason why theory-driven research can't be of the same level. Can I just go to the next slide, please? So the book itself, I think we will agree, is pedagogically or andragogically oriented. It's designed to communicate with fellow researchers, as is the book series. The book series was designed by me to be pedagogically oriented. And those keen to relate theory to practice in deeper ways. It offers us exemplars, pointers, ideas about where we can take this world of theory-driven research further. And there are a number of aspects to this pedagogical element to the book. I'll just describe these briefly. So the first one is we have context chapters. So as well as a more general introduction chapter, each section in the book, which I'll come back to, has an opening chapter which provides an overview of some of the major political and theoretical issues that impact, for example, institutional governance, academic work, and the student experience. And we hope this offers the reader a strong basis from which to engage with the subsequent chapters in each section. So we very much have the reader in mind when we're designing this book. There's also a focus on theory and method, which really directly relates to the core theme of the book series. Every case study includes a section entitled Critical Reflections in Social Theory and Methodology. And these provide a space for contributors and readers to consider the ways in which the research evidence bridges the gap between theory and method. So it's really important, that part, because it's not just early career people who struggle with this. We all do, and the relationship between theory and method should be core to any methodology. And it's also a key objective of the book series within which this collection sits. And then also there's a consistent focus on the changing politics of higher education. The book is on politics. It's a political focus on the politics of HE. So a recurring theme is the way in which a changing political landscape and has impacted on institutional life, whether this be in relation to institutional governance, academic work, or the student experience. This shared focus allows the reader to build connections between conceptual frameworks and to enhance their knowledge of the relationship between social theory and methodology across the research field. Next slide, please. Okay, so you'll have gathered that there's a certain approach we've taken to the book itself. And that was, I think, pretty much there from the beginning, I think. The book is divided into 3 sections. A section on university governance, which was edited by myself, The Politics of Academic Work, which was edited by Christina, and The Politics of Student Experience, which was edited by Rilla and Kieran. So, as I said before, each section has an introductory chapter, followed by a set of case studies. Within this structure, the book identifies how the changing politics of higher education has impacted on institutional governance, as well as the 2 main groups of people affected by these politics: academics, people like myself, and students as well. This offers a form of research triangulation, offering a privileged vantage point from which to assess the various ramifications of changing political imperatives. So we hope that this is a good, a useful way to look at this world of university life. The structure also allows readers to compare and contrast different conceptual and research approaches as well, because there are different methods used across the book within their own specialized research fields. Okay, so that's the introduction finished. I think I'm kind of sticking to time. We can go to the next slide, which is our interactive element now. So if you just take a minute or two to engage with this. Yes, that's some interesting responses there. It's a nice backdrop to my section coming up. Rules, lots of rules. Hegemony, classic idea there, classic concept from Gramsci in relation to HE governance. Power right in the middle. Yep, absolutely. Opaqueness, accountability, the ref hanging over all of us. At least we're off the hook right now in terms of publications. Are we in a ref period now? Will this book count? Not too sure. Lovely. Thanks everybody. Great. I hope you found that useful. Let me go into. Let's go to the next slide then, and I want to introduce. So this is me still talking here. Sorry about that. I'm just sitting here looking at these words, but I'm also thinking, I hope I don't turn into a cat. This is probably everybody's worried about this these days. It's COVID anxiety. So the first section was edited by myself, and is on social theory and university governance. So the focus here is on the management of HE institutions and the kinds of mechanisms of power and control at work in the university sector. So the kind of ideas that were generated in the word pool, power, compliance, regulation particularly, accountability, ref as an inspectoring tool, technologies of power, all that stuff is part of this agenda. So I'll just go on to the next slide and talk a little bit about the rationale for section 1. In a way, for those of you working in the sector, I assume many of you do, are students in the sector. Some of the rationale will be fairly obvious, won't it? I suppose university governance is evidently a hotbed of issues of power, prestige, and performance. And part of that, part of the backdrop of that, in which I discuss, is the rise of new public management, still seems to be new, and new governance in the context of hyper-globalization and neoliberalization. So inevitably, HE governance is impacted. We see this, internationally to somewhat diverging degrees, but there tends to be a convergence in many countries around issues to do with privatization, marketization, consumerism, and competition. So these are the kind of ideas that flow through this particular section, but actually aren't too far away from the other sections either. So university governance has been dramatically transformed. I think it's fair to say, in the UK at least, over a matter of decades, moving the 21st century to a more intense and concentrated version of the business-oriented and marketized model that took hold in the latter part of the 20th century. So my time in the university sector, well, it's long enough, I have to say, and I've actually seen some of these changes take place to varying degrees in the last 20 years. At least I've been working in the UK for 20 years. So I have seen a kind of strengthening, intensifying of some of these aspects. The traditional collegial model of institutional governance, while a somewhat romanticized conception of academic history, could not compete with the mounting pressures that came with managerialist demands for efficiency and surveillance, alongside the financial imperatives that resulted from immersion in an uber competitive environment. Money matters now more than it ever did, I think it's fair to say. Thank you. Just on to the next slide, please. So in this section, we have 3 excellent contributions from Eric Liebeck and the rise of university management, Stephen Dane and Piri on student satisfaction as governmentality, and Thomas Koch and Julio Lebrana on HE and quality assurance. I'll come back to just give a little bit more detail about them in a second, but let me just talk about this section in a little bit more detail. The section on social theory and governance introduces the reader to 3 pertinent ways of exploring the field of academic governance, whilst applying different theoretical lenses to cast a critical perspective on the problematics explored. So as you can see here, the works of people like Norbert Elias, Michel Foucault, and Nicholas Luhmann are put to work with the intention of promoting critical debate about different issues that currently affect the academy. Foucault is really strong in the field, I would think, but its excellence is really fantastic to have Elias and Luhmann's work in this section on university governance. These include a discussion of emerging managerial hierarchy as a byproduct of increasing external and internal pressures put on the academy. The deconstruction of student satisfaction, data as a key indicator of quality and governing strategies, and analysis of accountability mechanisms that foment a type of performativity in our sector that tends to undermine the conventions associated with the university. All of these chapters speak to key issues currently affecting academia internationally, and there is a nice international aspect to the book. And all three chapters make use of social theory to emphasize the importance of such tools in fostering deeper understandings of the issues at hand. And so if I could just go to the next slide and provide a little bit more detailed backdrop to the chapter. So Eric Liebeck, his chapter on Elias, which is also linked to his book on Norbert Elias and the Sociology of Education, which came out in the book series recently as well, which is highly recommended. In the chapter, Eric discusses the emergence of new hierarchies due to internal and external pressures on the institutions, especially state and market interventions, which positioned vice chancellors at the center of decision making. So through this perspective, Eric invites the reader to interpret the structure of university executive groups as a kind of court society, akin to the absolutist courts that Norbert Elias analyzed in his work, The Court Society, and also The Civilizing Process as well. Highly recommended them too. In these contexts, etiquette and manners were binding norms that agents could not afford to challenge due to the threat of exclusion from these figurations. So it's a really interesting take on the politics and the relations that really matter in university governance, not lowly people like myself. Stephen and Anne, in their chapter, explore how the Foucauldian concepts of governmentality, and we can see from the slide that Foucault is quite dear to a lot of people's hearts, concepts of governmentality, subjectivation, and technologies of self can be put to work in understanding how measures of student satisfaction have effects on the relationship between academics and students and working practices in the university. So in this regard, Stephen and Anne, quite convincingly, I have to say, assert that academics face major challenges when it comes to upholding the values of higher education. They also propose that practices that commodify HE are reductive in that they lack key understandings of the purpose of university. Again, which is a theme, as I said at the beginning, it comes up time and time again. There isn't just one notion of what the university is. And as a result, it needs to be challenged. So in the final chapter in the section, Tomás and Julio propose the exploration of governmentality. Again, another Foucauldian theme, but that's difficult to avoid in this sector, through the conception of performativity and in the context of Chilean higher education policies. So they combine the works of Luhmann. So in a hybridized way, they combine the work of Nicholas Luhmann on organizational theory and Foucault's discourse analysis to develop a theory-informed understanding of the consequences of adopting new accountability mechanisms in HE. So you can see a kind of a strand of accountability and regulatory regimes within this section, which reflects my own interest as well. But it's ripe for theoretical analysis. So Tomás and Julio argue that higher education accountability systems, in this hybridized way, they look at it, create a regime of power and truth a la Foucault that replaces traditional cultures, such as those based on prestige and reputation, while it's also deepening the technification of universities as decisional organizations. So that's where they bring the Lumen stuff in. So that again is a theme coming through the work of people using different ideas to work with the main author that they've had in the book. So I hope that was a useful overview of my section, and it was a delight to edit that section. So before we go to the next section, to Christina, I think we have the next slide, which is another word play. Ooh, thank you. So if you can engage with this, please.
Okay, so I'll just start um, by kind of commenting on the kind of the word cloud that is coming through as I prepare to introduce the section 2 of the book. So it's really interesting here actually that the kind of the big word, there's this kind of interplay almost like causalization and balance, precarity and exploitation. So the aspect of balance is also in the mix. It seems that he kind of somehow have a very good understanding of the field and but also what's in the book. So I think that's a really interesting aspect, and also aspect of well-being, formativity, impact, which is a kind of a keyword, especially in the ref world. Workloads, time is also one that has come to the fore quite substantially, and obviously power as the kind of the key tenet of social theory as well. So I think you're right on the money there in terms of the kind of the issues that were explored in the book, and obviously that's something that if you are interested in this area, it's probably an area that you've explored extensively from those perspectives as well. So yeah, so I think we're all in tune with that. So if I could get the next slide, please. So the part 2, so the second section of the book, we called it Social Theory and the Politics of Academic Work, and it kind of was about the kind of the aspects of focusing on academic cultures and the implications that it has to professional identities, but also professional self. So if I could go to the next slide, please, before I introduce the rationale behind this section, which is probably quite self-explanatory, I would just like to outline the the chapters, so the titles of the chapters. So we had 5 chapters in this section, so it was a very popular section, and I was reading rereading these chapters this week again, and somehow reading it in paper just kind of, I was very kind of flattered to. It was even better than I remember when we were editing and working together to put these chapters together ready for publication. So I can actually not tell you which one is my favorite, because they're all so well written and so rich in their approaches. And as you can see from the title, just to kind of whet your appetite a little bit about what this section has to offer, there is a kind of almost an organic connection between the different chapters. So they kind of almost fall through from one to the other in terms of thematics and issues that need to be approached. So in a nutshell, if I can get the next slide, please, what this section explores in great depth with very different examples and very different takes, which is what's interesting as well, is the aspect of academic work and how it's become so politicized in the space and how in the space of university higher education, and how the university has been transformed in recent decades, and how that affects not only academics practices, but by in the same way their professional identity. And that is pretty much also related to this progressive changing nature of intellectual work and what it means to be an academic. So these were the kind of the rationale that we wanted to kind of explore, and the book authors delivered. It's really rich account of that work. My job here is not to introduce the chapters, because that's not my research, but it is to kind of outline what are the kind of key thematics that came out of that. So if we move to the next slide, please, we can talk a little bit about what were the main preoccupations with regards to this in terms of the book. Could I have the next slide, please? Also, while we get the next slide, if you want to start putting any questions on the chat, then we'll pick them up. So please make sure if you have any questions that you want to talk about, you can start putting them there now. So you don't have to wait until the end of the session, and we can pick them as we go along, or leave them to the end so everyone can see what the questions are. So one of the aspects that came very clearly across the entire set of chapters for this section was, again, in a kind of fallback from the governance section as well, this preoccupation with the university as a kind of a more neoliberalized space, and the kind of the policies that are kind of transforming academia. So those policies and the impact that it has on practice. And from there, quite a few themes have emerged. And for example, identity formations and transformations, how academics see themselves and act in those spaces, their positionality and status as well. And also interesting is a light to the kind of experiences of precarity and casualization that came across also different chapters, and I'll talk about that in a minute. This also idea of moral values and its kind of dichotomy and dilemma in relation to economic imperatives, and how that pushes academics in different directions and questions their status and presence and positionality within the academic space. And then also power. Power was an aspect that came across a majority of the chapters. Also considerations regarding time and what time means in an academic space and in relation to working cultures, and also how space is occupied and how space is taken. And in here, a kind of also from a gendered perspective. So, and we have that. Again, these are themes that came across different chapters, and do not really just talk about one chapter, although some of the book authors here may relate to one more theme than others. So it's really interesting to see how these themes are emerging across different chapters, focusing on different perspectives and case studies, but this become kind of recurrent themes in that sense. So if we move on to the next slide, please, just to talk a little bit more in detail of these aspects, and again to signpost to some really interesting discussions. Fabio talks, for example, about the chronopolitics of higher education in relation to performativity and intellectual work, and his proposal is really, really interesting because it talks about the movements of slow scholarship as not so much as an opposition to fast scholarship, so that we shouldn't really understand the temporal aspect of academic practice from a binary perspective, but rather from a relational one. So inviting at understanding the different paces of academia and the kind of the agentic, he calls it the agentic, oh, I forgot to get his name, sorry, but the agent aspect of taking power from the university in terms of shared temporality. So really, really interesting aspect, and draws on more left field types of practices such as blogging and writing groups that for a more neoliberalized academia doesn't really have the same space or recognition. So really interesting aspects in terms of talking about the chronological or chronopolitics of higher education. There's also, I was really fascinated by kind of the options and Watt's understanding of academia from a Stoic and existentialist perspective. So that was, again, a really rich but very, very original perspective, where the authors debated ideas regarding to the dilemmas of resilience and resistance. And again, here, not thinking about them as binary or opposite, but rather how do they work relationally, and using dialogue for that perspective. Kate Thomas also thinking about power geometries and gender spaces and the relation of power and space in practices of belonging, not thinking about space as static, but rather as relational. So again, there's another theme that is coming through most of the chapters, is this idea of relationality, which is very key to applications of social theory. And I think this section really offers excellent examples of how we can think about these problems in more relational ways, rather than the kind of the typical structure agency divide. And Freire kind of continues, so Luisa Freire continues with that kind of aspect as well of space, and who gets to occupy space and who gets to be in those spaces, but from an epistemic perspective, struggles of epistemic justice and knowledge production as performativity. So bringing also the gender element with regards to that aspect. And finally, kind of things almost for me, the way I've read these chapters in context with each other was almost like in thinking about how John Harrison and Azor Degan talk about casualization from very specific contexts and discourses of othering. So all of those kind of, it's almost for me, these 5 chapters almost tell a story in relation to the current state of university and intellectual self, if you will. So really rich accounts also theoretically, and that's what I want to talk about next. So if I can go to the next slide, please. So what we have in terms of theories application, again, a huge diversity. In these theories of application, as Mark was saying as well, what's really interesting is that this set of chapters in this section bring to the fore very explicitly the needs to get the voices, the narrative. So a lot of the majority of these chapters rely on very personal accounts, on bringing the individual to the fore, which again, I think it's a really interesting perspective and a kind of a counter narrative to a more kind of neutral type of research, to kind of be replaced with a more kind of rich personal where the personal becomes political type of account. So, for example, we have reflections of temporality in academia through Fabian Canuts's chapter that draws on the work of Barbara Adams and thinking about shared temporalities and how these shared temporalities are constructed as part of people's activities and practices, and now they question the pace of academic work and agency. Also very interesting is the work done around more reflective methodologies using dialogues, using Margaret Atwood's more dialogical reflective practice in tandem with existentialism and stoicism. So it's really, really interesting to see that hybridization of the application of different ideas coming together to build something really, really interesting. And here, I was fascinated by this chapter in the sense that they really walk you through as well of how this reflexive methodology can be enacted. So really great example, really rich example. And the same applies to narratives and visual methods to exemplify how power geometries can be unearthed. So how Maisie's work can be used in more kind of participative ways. And again, I think Kate makes a great contribution in this sense. Moving also, the chapter provides the readers also with really, or this section with really interesting accounts of feminist literature, and it's a kind of questioning. Questioning the positionality of people within of women within the academic space, and making already contributions. So a really interesting chapter in relation to how you can no longer apply theory, but you can kind of extract theory from theory application. So in that sense, it's where Karen's citizenship, I can't even pronounce it, comes to the fore as a new form of kind of providing epistemic justice to academic spaces. So counteracting the kind of the waves of solidarity with something much deeper of shared vulnerability. So really, really interesting and original contributions. And the same applies to the exploitation of life actualities and institutional practices. So the chapter on casualization that brings together the work of Margaret Smith in relation to Foucault's work of discursive constructions of governmentality and what it means to be a good academic within the conditions of casual work. And what comes to the fore is a very deep understanding of what it means to be the other. So it's really, I can't honestly, I can't tell you this enough because it's such a rich narrative, and I was reading it this week. I thought it was even better, maybe because I'm reading it on paper. It's even more fascinated about these accounts and the contributions of these authors to the book than I remember being when I was editing the book. So if it was 5 stars before, now I'll give it 7. So it's I hope it kind of gives you an idea, and at some point we'll probably have an opportunity to have book the chapters authors to really talk deeply about their own chapters. But the idea here that there's a richness in terms of how the authors have accounted for the kind of the research that they're doing, not only from a theoretical perspective, but how that theory is matched up to the methodologies used, and what you get is this richness of topics from very creative ways of much more deeper understanding than we usually come across. So I can't really praise this work more. So I think now we're ready to move to section 3, but before that, there's a question as well.
We can give a couple of minutes for some more keywords to emerge, and then we'll make a start. So lots of great keywords already emerging, and I think Kieran and I are also really delighted to be here today and to share the all kind of hard work that has gone into putting this book together from the contributors and editors, and it's been an incredible journey, and I think it's great to share that today. But shall we start with some of those keywords? So let's see, I'll make a start in what kind of strikes me, and then Kieran, hopefully you have some other thoughts that emerge from those keywords. But I can see that consumerism is one of the big themes at the very center of this word cloud, and it doesn't surprise me, because that underpins a lot of our work, that many people who do look into student experience these days cannot escape looking at the consumerism and what has the market system done to our discourses around students. But lots of other themes. I can see the well-being is quite a big word here, and I wonder whether that's to do with the COVID crisis as well, and I can see the COVID pandemic being mentioned as well. And lots of concerning developments around precarity, student debt, human capital development, consumption, things like that. And also the counter discourse, which I would call the counter discourse around engagement, criticality, learning. So those kinds of interesting competing discourses, I would say. Kieran, what do you notice?
Yeah, well, I think it's really interesting that actually, like, a lot of thematic chapters in our section actually cover this. So they cover debt, they cover employability, they cover consumerism as well, and also multiplicity as well, actually, suppose, as well, of student experience. And it's interesting that there are as well some terms around learning and around supervision, but it also seems to be quite individual. So there's nothing about student unions or like student groups and things like that. And so it is very, it's within this sort of like marketized neoliberal sense actually of feeling like student where they're on their own.
Yeah, that's actually a very interesting point, and we'll come to that when introducing some of those chapter contributions. So I think we can move on to the next slide, please. And just to remind you, if you have any questions about this section or the previous two, or anything else related to this book, then please use the question Q&A opportunity which you have in your app or the function. We are very happy to discuss later on and respond to those questions. So please do not feel that you have to hold back. But just a little bit about this section then. It's another beautiful section of this book, I would say. It's a little bit shorter than the academic labor section, but equally deep and equally inspiring. And we can't see who is here just now, but if any of the contributors are here, then huge thank you for all the hard work that has gone into that. And it was absolutely absolute delight to work with you as we develop those chapters. And as Mark said at the beginning, then we very much how we approach that book, but also when thinking about this section in particular, it has become an enormous resource for anybody interested in looking into student experience from the research perspective, but also from the practical perspective. And it's also a source of inspiration, I would say. That I was looking through the book this week again, and thinking about that, that it's amazing that people have been able to speak about very complex theoretical ideas, very complex educational issues and related to student experience here in particularly in rather accessible ways. So there is something for people who have strong expertise in the area to learn something really new and innovative again, and for those who are new to the field, that it's quite a useful access to the field. So I think that's really important. And I think I'll just carry on then, Kieran, with the next slide. Next slide, please. And then obviously you can add as we go, and then I'll pass on the word to you as well. But just a little bit about the rationale and our starting point, that the whole point of this section was, quoting Kieran here, because we had a chat about the section and our thoughts throughout this process, is that to make the familiar term student experience strange, to kind of take that notion, that concept of student experience, which, you know, we can't escape. That is, you know, it's in our faces these days, whether we work in the university, whether we study, whether we research student experience. It's a term that has become so common, and in some ways also kind of an empty shell, that it can mean anything and everything, or everything and nothing. That it's quite an interesting to think about. And the approach in this section to student experience is to look into that as a political notion, something that is fundamentally shaped by the market system or the neoliberal system that we're all part of, but also something that is agentic, something that includes student agency. So that's the kind of the political nature, looking into how student experience is fundamentally politicized, but also political in its essence. So that was the kind of fundamental, you know, aim of this section. And in doing so, what the authors or the contributors allowed us to do by pulling those chapters together is to situate then this notion of student experience within the contemporary higher education context, but also when doing that, to travel between those different examples, which included you know, kind of more institutional settings, student unions, graduate identities, everyday discourses that students use, between those different examples and different settings. That we have a chapter here from a really interesting chapter from Beruen context. So looking into those different settings. And when exploring and focusing on the issues of student experience, then obviously to look into what are the theoretical tools that help us to make sense of that. And there's a lot of theory in this chapter, and hybridization of theory that will come to in a moment as well. So how to apply that. So in some ways, it's a great resource to look into what are the topical issues that people are these days looking at when focusing on student experience, but also what are those theoretical toolkits that could help us. Kieran, I don't know if I have captured that in a nutshell, or if you want to add anything here before we move on.
No, I think that's great. No, that's a good summary.
So let's move on to the next slide, please. So this is what it looks like. So as you see, there are 3 core chapters plus a little chapter or introductory kind of contextualization from Kieran and myself. So just a little bit to give you kind of insight or guidance that what you could find from those chapters and why you should certainly read them. We thoroughly recommend. And so what we did with Kieran, we started with looking into and kind of continuing that thread throughout the book, looking into this kind of neoliberalization and marketization of higher education and questioning what that has done to student political agency in particularly. And we try to kind of look into how that has shifted very much from kind of more collective forms of resistance to individualized forms. And also to introduce a few theoretical kind of lenses that could be explored further and focused on in different projects. We brought in Arendt in terms of looking into how do we conceptualize political action as something that fundamentally, from her perspective, would be collective act. and risky and things like that, but also drawing to Bourdieu, Habermas, and Foucault. As you have seen, that Foucault has kind of been throughout this book quite an important theoretical lens, but allowing us to think about the kind of more individuals and subtle forms of resistance. So that's what we did with the setting chapter. But then moving on to Zedomir's chapter, which looks into, which I think is incredibly topical these days and underexplored, is the kind of everyday forms of subtle kind of agency and resistance that students or more broadly people involved in higher education practice. And what he did, he brought into the idea of humor as a form of resistance by bringing in Habermas and Foucault, and looking to how students use humor to act against and make sense of graduate debt and high tuition fees within the marketized higher education system in England. So really interesting and kind of original take on student agency and student experience, obviously. Moving on to Diego's chapter, which is incredibly useful resource for those who want to apply a Foucauldian idea of governmentality or notion of governmentality into international settings. So what Diego has done is has looked into, first of all, how the higher education sector in Peru has been marketized and how it has resulted in kind of private and public universities and the different status and political context associated with those institutions. And what he then did was looking into how then student activism, particularly through institutionalist forms of activism and revolt, in addition to that how it gets different responses from the people in power and from the government, depending on what university students are associated. In other words, looking into neoliberal governmentality in relation to post-coloniality and forms of racism that exist and the status that different students have within the marketized system. And finally, the chapter 15, which is an incredible reflection on how to use figured worlds, and particularly when you want to explore student identities and graduate identities. So through narrative research methodology, they've explored into how students construct their identities and students from different disciplinary backgrounds. And has a really strong reflection on how to apply figured worlds into narrative research. Kieran, did I capture things in a fair way? Obviously, you have to read the chapters yourself. But...
Yeah, no, I think it is like a really, as the rest of the book as well, it's a real rich resource in terms of thinking about these actual case studies, then how dynamic theory was applied in this empirical way, and the relationship between methods and theory. And I think, it is, as we'll talk about in a minute again, but it is this sort of the benefits of this hybrid approach as well, and whether that's actually combining theories yourself or taking a hybrid theory or a hybrid theory already, so through figured worlds, for example.
Absolutely. Great. So let's go to the next slide. So just briefly to kind of how I capture that, and then I pass it on to you, Kieran, is that one of the key lessons learned, or when we problematize student experience and how the contributors problematize, one of the core themes of this section is looking into how you, when engaging with the notion of student experience, which fundamentally is politicized and political, that is fundamentally part of that marketized and neoliberalized higher education setting. And then you have to kind of explore the issues around student identity and agency, which is fundamentally related to the structural context and the student experience. But I'll let you elaborate, Kieran, if you'd like.
I think it's, it is like whenever we were actually getting ready for this launch, and Rilla and I met about this section, and it's thinking about what we actually, it is that making the familiar strange, or this sort of epistemological break through through social theory, and trying to critically think about student experience within and also beyond the these sort of like neoliberal definitions of it, and it's about the agency that students have, but also the structures that they're actually working within, right? And so again, back to this idea, for example, from Arendt about risk taking is required, but are you able to actually take those risks and things like that? And so it's about it's about trying to have that sort of balance when thinking about the student experience, and the ways in which perhaps they actually can resist some of these pressures as well. Could I have my next slide, please? Feeling very fancy asking for slides. So within the actual set of chapters, then, as we've already briefly mentioned, then there's a series of different theorists, and we think that these actual theorists are really appropriate when we're thinking about neoliberalism and about marketization, in terms of thinking about the mechanisms, the processes of neoliberalism, consequences and resistance, but also maybe opportunities to think about individuals beyond this, and the sort of habit of us of almost thinking, well, this is the only context, or this is the field, and almost sort of undoing what we're trying to resist ourselves through our research, right? And thinking about, and whether that's sort of trying to reclaim some of the life world, or thinking about digging in a bit deeper to some of the multiple identities that both students and also graduates have. And so the way in which the theories were used then within our chapters. So in terms of Habermas, so it was very much about this idea of critiquing the colonization of the life world, and sort of thinking about how to reclaim the space through different types of resistance. In terms of Foucault, and thinking about how Foucault can give us a sort of blueprint, I guess, of actually how things are working, as a sort of starting point, or sort of staging point, to then think about how we can actually react, or sort of back up, or sort of push back actually some of the systems, and this sort of a hybrid approach between Foucault and Habermas. And again, also Foucault is used in the chapters when thinking about trying to actually outline different power structures, and looking at this sort of interaction between university governance and student unions, and the actual consequences of this then actually for different types of institutions. And then, interestingly, then with our last chapter, looking at figured worlds and using Holland et al.'s approach, and really trying to actually show us, or to think about a different way of actually looking at students and looking at graduates, and looking at this dialogic performance, I suppose, of multiple selves, and thinking about the actual agency. And I think it's about actually trying to force us to then think about other things which are valuable for those students and for those graduates, which actually neoliberalism doesn't really care about and doesn't value. And perhaps sometimes as researchers we don't value them either, because we're thinking about what is a successful graduate, for example. But we have a danger of nearly actually using the same metrics within neoliberalism that we actually rail against. And so it's about giving the agency back to individuals, and saying what's important for them. And then in our sort of first introductory chapter as well, so we also focused then a little bit on Bourdieu and Arendt. And I think it's, for the arguments from Bourdieu, and it's really this idea about how collective action is the only way to go, because if there's a danger within these systems that if we are the sort of sole individual who's sort of helping out we actually like prop up these like systems by not showing how they're actually not working in practice, for example. And so thinking about the role of like collective action and the like danger of that, I suppose, as well, in terms of whether we actually have that agency or that capital to then actually resist. Can I have my next slide, please? And then just again, then in terms of some of these like lessons learned, the hybridization of theory, I think, is really, really beneficial to be able to actually look through multiple lenses and to actually bring these theories together and thinking about some of them like strengths and weaknesses of them, and I guess actually making those leaps in between theories and showing how this sort of like a hybridized approach actually can work really well. And then also again, in terms of the range of different methods that our authors use, so whether it was the genealogical approaches or documentary evidence, but then also quite like close qualitative data collection as well, and just really showing, I suppose, the actual breadth of opportunities that we have within research when we're being theoretical, right? And so it's not as if we can only one or the other approach to social research. And so it's the real benefit of a broad range of options. And so hopefully that will be there for both students and also researchers who are thinking about, well, how much actually can I push this maybe? And actually there's actually quite a lot of scope.
Mm-hmm.
So thank you. That's the end of our slides, I believe.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm still impressed how much good stuff fits into one book.
I know. This one?
Yes. Mark, I don't know if you want to come back in and lead the question session.
I think Mark is there.
Yeah, I'm here, yeah. Are there any questions?
We don't have any questions just now, so I don't know if people want to take any a couple of minutes to type in the questions, because the questions are coming through a different system. So if people want to questions or comments or anything that it sparked your interest, we would be very happy to hear from you. But I was wondering, as it was really interesting to hear my own colleagues to talk about their views on their own sections. And maybe we could start while we're waiting for some kind of comments from the audience. And I think Kieran and Rilla have started to talk a little bit about that. But maybe we could reflect a little bit about the lessons learned, but also think about how do we take these ideas forward as academics and as researchers and supervisors? And how do you think that these ideas that have been started in the book and can be embedded in discussions, but also the training of methods, which I think from a kind of a supervisor perspective, this is probably one of the biggest challenges that we face now when we're encouraging people to apply social theory. So I don't know if any of you would like to get that started. Sorry to put you on the spot.
Yeah, if I may get involved in that one. I mean, this is a great area to look at, isn't it? Because, I mean, it might seem contradictory, but, there needs to be some kind of institutionalizing of the way that we're approaching these topics, because there's so much knowledge learned and gained from this counter movement and the ways of understanding issues like precarity and power and all the rest of it. So it would seem to me that thinking of ways that this can be embedded into, discussions, at least discourses about methodologies, the training of methods, because a book like ours offers a kind of, I suppose, a one-stop shop, doesn't it, in relation to saying, look, if you're doing higher education studies and you want theory-driven research, here's a book that can offer kind of useful examples to get us away from this notion that this kind of exists on the margins. Is actually a very key part of the way in which people investigate. As Stephen Ball called it, terrors of performativity. I got a bit of Stephen Ball in for you, Rilla. There you go. Can't go wrong there. that so some kind of institutionalizing it, because we're up against always methodological fetishism about methods all the time, and keeping theory over here, which is the daftest hangover from the positivism wars that there's ever been. So clearly theory-driven research is a vital part of the way that we understand these things. And as I say in the foreword, value freeness is not just about keeping ideas out, keeping values away from the research. It's about having the freedom to value, freedom to add the theory into the research. So that's my position. So some form of institutionalizing will be a way to take it forward. So, and hopefully our book is a valuable addition to that.
If I can add to that, I think, from my point of view, it's also having those spaces to discuss and speak about theory, because I haven't heard anybody ever saying that it's easy to read theory. It's a huge time and energy investment into getting your ideas around those big spaces. And who has that time? The thing is that we're so pressurized as, students, PhD researchers, as staff, that the time is such a cost now. So almost creating those spaces where we could learn from each other to at least, have that access into something that is such a complex field, in my opinion.
Yeah, it's how we sort of teach it, isn't it? Right? Because if we teach in different silos and we don't allow people to actually bring in different elements into the sort of different courses and into different modules and so on, then they don't see the actual thread going through, right? And so you're sort of bad, people are bad as like a theory person or something like that, and then there's an assumption that they're not doing empirical research, they're not sort of actually getting data, because they're like too abstract or something. And this idea that like theory is abstract and it's not meant to be used is really is quite dangerous.
It's the oddest thing, isn't it, Kieran, that one semester theory, the other semester method. I mean, somewhere surely people come along and go, what were we thinking? What were we thinking? We weren't thinking. It doesn't make any sense. But it goes back to this fetish for methods, without the theory. Daft. But anyway, that's my take.
I could add to that, but we have a comment and a question from Richard Ray. So what do colleagues feel the application of other social theories to education research that go beyond Bourdieu and Foucault, which have become the hegemonic discourses of educational researchers over the last 30 to 40 years, example, Marx, and more recent authors? So what do you feel about the application of theory.
Well, I think our book has good examples of. I mean, they are near to hegemonic. I mean, there's no getting away with it. Because they really speak to core concerns, don't they, about power and control and all the rest of it. So it's undeniable. But we do have people like Massey, we do have people like Luhmann included in the book. I think the theoretical wide lens of social theory should be celebrated and engaged with more. So we do have some elements in, but it's a really good question because there are many other ways to think about these things. For example, I was looking back in the book like you guys were doing, as you do, right before having a book launch, and I'm thinking, I'm a big fan of Christopher Hood, his work in political science and public administration. He did this great book on the blame game. The link between that stuff and what we've been talking about in our sections becomes more and more clear to me. Maybe part of a more engagement with the emotional domain. That level, the blame game, the cynicism, the low level corruption that takes place in institutions. Surely there's ways to bring other ideas in from areas that we may not consider social theory. So that the extending and widening the lens of theory would be very useful.
Yeah, and I think we do have some examples of that. So thinking about the chapter on Stoicism that draws from philosophy, and I think that's a really interesting perspective as well. And that's what social theory does. I'm sorry, my headphones just died. It brings other perspectives And one of the things that you were talking about is that the book does offer examples on how to think with theory, not necessarily just how to think with those theories. And I think that's something that all the book chapter authors did, was really to open the black box of theory application. So I was delighted to, again, rereading, because you forget these things, and how people started many chapters with saying, this is what the question was, and this is how we rationalize this question. And I think these are, is really hard to do, and we usually don't do that in other types of publications because of space. So I think that there's this is where I don't think we're just bound by these theories, but many times it's fashionable as well. And so, but if we take the lessons from application, then we have kind of guidance on how to go and find other theories that may allow us to ask different questions. And I think that's the kind of key now as part of training, is how the question is not kind of created in a vacuum almost, but rather is fueled by certain types of understanding. And one of the things I was really surprised, we didn't get as much Bourdieu this time as we have gotten in other books. So there was a bit more diversity, and I think people engaging in social theory are starting to diversify their influences.
And I guess,
sorry, Rilla, after you.
I just had a quick, kind of comment or thought around that. It's also how do we engage with those hegemonic or dominant theories as well. And I think it was quite interesting to look at the chapters in the book when they applied them in diverse contexts. For example, in the student section in Berruian context, which intersects with various, very different political situations and historic situations. That how do you apply those dominant concepts in different contexts? And also how do you bring in other theorists in support of those theories as well? How do you hybridize? So I thought that was also kind of quite an unique or important element, that it's not one standard way of looking at those theories. There's discussions to be had around that.
Yeah, like it is. I mean, it is this idea that even if people are using like a limited number of theorists, they are also using them in really, really different ways. Like I see Bourdieu used in loads of different ways that are different elements of his work, different periods of his work, or just different interpretations of his work. And it's not just, here's another five articles on Bourdieu. It's 5 very different articles all using theory, which again is that exciting thing about the application of it, right? I think that's a big thing. So even though, and sometimes, and you see there is sort of coming back into popularity rather maybe than new theories coming up as well, but they're being used in different ways, or the sort of hybrid models where people are taking older schools of thought but then using them differently, which again is a new thing.
And that's why we asked people in the book to provide these sections, critical reflections on theory and methodology, to reflect back on their own integration of theory and method in their own work, instead of, genuflecting before the great gods of the likes of Foucault and Bourdieu. And as you say, Kieran, yes, we're all very pro people using theory, all the better for it. But at the same time, in the vein of Bourdieu, in the spirit of Bourdieu, being critically reflexive on our own work is part of the work of value-laden education science, I would think. Is there any other questions?
We don't have any other questions, but I don't know if anyone wants to add anything else. So because we can't see the audience, it's we're reliant on people submitting any comments for us to have some type of interaction. We're almost at the end of the session. We have around 3 minutes, but if anyone else wants to communicate with us.
Can I just add something as well, Christina, that I know the book is expensive at the moment, so the book series they come out in hardback. This is quite normal in the publishing world. They come out expensive enough in hardback, but 18 months from now, they come out in paperback and they're much more affordable. So just so people know that. So for example, the teacher education book in the series is coming out in March in paperback, and it's like £25 or something. So just so people know that.
Okay. We have a comment from Jennifer Nicole. She says, I'm looking at the process of individualization and the impact it may have had on students and graduates. Did this come up at all? So I think that's more for Kieran and Willa.
Sorry, can you repeat the question? Because
I'm looking at the process, Jennifer says, of individualization and the impact this may have had on students and graduates. And she asked if this has come up at all in the book.
So what we did, there is individualization from the perspective of students' political agency, in terms of how the political agency has become more individualized. So in that sense, yes. In terms of the wider construction of student identity, maybe less so. So if you're after some of those political engagement, how the practices have changed from the kind of more collective student protest and towards individual practices, then that should give you some food for thought.
Great. Thanks everybody. Thanks for those questions, and thanks to all to my fellow contributors. I think we need to wrap up now. So can I just say on behalf of ourselves, thank you so much to everybody for coming along. We've really enjoyed it. It's nice to do something nice on a Friday afternoon, isn't it, among all the rest of our COVID anxiety. So really appreciated the opportunity. I hope you all have a good weekend. Do get in touch if you want, especially through BERA, the Social Theory and Education SIG. We'd be happy to hear from you. Thanks very much, everybody.